Hi, welcome to today's tutorial. Today's tutorial is not about lights. It's not about fill cards. It's not about tripods. It's not about cameras. Today's tutorial is about a thing called a fixture. Now, some of you might think that a fixture is something you screw a light bulb into, something that's on the ceiling that you're going to screw a light bulb into. But in photography terms, in photography parlance, a fixture is something that holds a subject in position so that you can photograph it more easily. It holds the item that you want to photograph in the specific way you want it to be held. The angle of it, how it's tilted, how it's positioned. It might have to do with putting two subjects together, one next to the other. Fixtures can be made out of a lot of different things. They don't really have to be beautiful. They really just have to work extremely well. They're always outside the frame or they're hidden by the subject. But it doesn't mean that they don't make life easier for a studio still life photographer. The second thing that I wanted to mention was just two items of housekeeping for people who've been following these tutorials. The first is we're going to be working on a hollow core door. Hollow core doors are really terrific because they don't warp and they don't sag. They are great tabletops. It doesn't matter whether you use two small tables to hold your hollow core door surface or whether you use two sawhorses. They are terrific because they hold a lot of weight and they don't flex. You don't have to go out and buy a brand new hollow core door. Sometimes you can find them being thrown out at a construction site. The second piece of housekeeping business is that many of you have noticed that in these tutorials, I almost always wear a black shirt. The primary reason I wear black shirts when I'm working in the studio is because I've gotten to the point where I hate having to retouch my reflection out of the photograph. I also, just as a little aside to that, if I wear a white shirt, I become a giant fill card. So when I go in to arrange a subject or take a light reading, the fact that I'm wearing a white shirt affects the exposure. If you don't believe me, you can try on a white shirt and a black shirt and hold it out in front of you when you try to meter something. I know from experience that the difference can be as much as 1/3 of an f-stop. But enough of black shirts, enough of hollow core doors. Let's get back to the subject at hand, which is making a fixture. Here we go. Come on. The first fixture I'm going to explain to you today is I call a sandbox. It's a fun way for photographers to play around. Basically, I take a 3/16" thick piece of foam board. I take 4 pieces of 3/4" square finished lumber. We cut them out and we tape them around the edges of the foam board. And now I didn't tape in the last one yet because I wanted to show you how it's done. All you do is you take a piece of gaffer tape, you open it up, you put it over the piece of lumber and you press it down. You take 2 more little teeny pieces and you put it into the corners of your sandbox so that it doesn't let sand escape out the corners of the sandbox. Okay, now a sandbox, which is what this is not a sandbox if you don't have a sand in it. Set Shop sells sand that you can put in their sandbags. It's sort of a white beach sand. It's sterile. It doesn't have little bugs in it. It doesn't have little pieces of garbage in it. So you can buy that. Personally, in a handicraft store, I found bags of a thing called art sand. Art sand is colored sand that comes in a variety of colors, and kids use it to make memory glasses with different layers of different colors of sand. It comes in red, it comes in yellow, it comes in green, it comes in white, it comes in orange. Art sand comes in a whole bunch of colors. Each bag weighs 2 pounds. This, which happens to be about a 16 by 20 sandbox, needs about 4 bags to fill my sandbox. Just as an aside, it pays to learn where handicraft stores in your neighborhood are. They are a great source of things like ribbon and things like yarn and things like artificial flowers and artificial leaves. All of these things are very helpful to a studio photographer. So I take a single edge blade. We're going to just pour the sand into the sandbox. Here's our first bag of it filling up the sandbox. This is bigger than the 3/4 inch lumber that I'm using, but it's bigger so that it fits over the entire top of my sandbox. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to push the sand around with my piece of lumber, and if you notice, what I end up with is a very smooth surface of sand. And that pristine surface is going to be the surface that I'm going to rest my subject on. I have here a bracelet. If I just press it into the sand, I can photograph this bracelet and it will sit there all day. If I jiggle the table or shake the table, it doesn't matter. The bracelet stays right where it is. From a creative point of view, it might be that you want to put a hand shape, and then you want to put the bracelet where the hand would be. Don't be limited. Use your creativity. Okay. Although you can use the green color sand for your sandbox, you can also put a piece of velvet or satin on top of the sand. I'm just laying a piece of velvet that I ironed out. Just for the record, when you iron out a piece of velvet, you always iron the back side of the velvet. You don't iron the front side. And then I could turn around and I could put a whole bunch of little items floating in the sandbox. And the sand supports each and every one of them. The reason why I mention this is because I can guarantee you that there will be a day when you have to photograph 12 little pieces of jewelry, and all 12 pieces of jewelry will drive you crazy if you try to do it on a regular surface, because every time you position one, another one will fall over. It's enough to truly drive you crazy. But using a sandbox, each one is supported as I place it. Now that we've cleaned up the mess we made with the green sand, I'm going to show you another thing that I found very helpful to help me support products in the position where I want them. What we're going to be talking about here is we would need something that's little and heavy. Over the years at garage sales and when I've seen a machinist who's retired, I've picked up an item called angle plates. They're made of cast iron and then they're machined and they're a perfect right angle. These are 2 by 2 inch angle plates. Here's another pair of them, just so that you can see what they look like. And these two are much heavier. They weigh about 5 pounds each, and they are 3 by 3 inch angle plates. Now, you could use 2 of them together to support something like that was long, or you could set them on their side so that whatever you wanted to place on them had rested on this right angle surface. The reason why they're really useful is that they're very, very heavy, so that they can support a lot of weight, but also they don't tip over easily. If you tried to use a piece of wood to do this, the wood doesn't have enough mass to keep its position where you want it. Because these are very heavy, and because of the fact that you can only find a retired machinist every so often, or a garage sale every so often where you might find them. A while ago, I decided to buy some steel blocks. I Googled the term small pieces of steel, and I found a supplier who would plasma cut pieces of steel for me. This is 1.5 inch steel. And if you look, you buy this stuff by the foot. And I bought a foot of it, about, and I had the guy cut them with a plasma cutter to 1 inch pieces, 3 inch pieces, and 2 inch pieces. Because I explained before that sometimes you want to use 2 of them and rest something over them, I never have them done in one at a time. I always buy 2 at a time. I also have a whole bunch of little 1 inch by 1 inch steel blocks that can be used when I am supporting smaller items. Just the way I put sand under a piece of velvet, you could also put steel blocks under a piece of velvet or a piece of satin and support things at different levels and never see the steel blocks and how they're arranged. But now we're going to use these steel blocks to position some plates and to an interesting graphic composition, and I'm going to construct a set. First, I'm going to start off with an orange plate. Then I'm going to take 2 of my metal blocks, place them on the plate. Then I'm going to take a yellow plate and place it on top of those steel blocks that I just placed. Then I'm going to take 2 more steel blocks and put them here and have a green plate extend into my set like that. And then I'm going to take an angle iron and use it to position a red plate that'll slip between the yellow plate and the orange plate. Finally, I'm going to take an orange mug and put it into my set. But by doing this, I was able to interlock various products at different heights. It makes the whole thing pretty interesting and exciting. You're looking at all the metal blocks that I'm using to position all the plates at different levels and how they interlock. You just saw me use some heavy steel blocks to hold up some plates on different levels. But let's say you want to take a picture of something and create a drop shadow on the surface so that it looks like it's floating off the surface. Now, you know and I know that we can use Photoshop to create a drop shadow. And that's all well and good, but what happens if you have 6 or 7 things in the photograph that you want each one of them to have a drop shadow under? What happens if you want them to all be at different levels in space? And doing that in Photoshop may require a lot more effort than it would be to do it on the set before you started. So the point is that sometimes it's quicker to do something earlier in the production of it than it is to do it in post-production after you've taken it. Now, some of you might remember the tutorial that I did where I used armature wire to make a handle for a fill card. For that particular set, I used some really heavy armature wire that looked like this. But armature wire is available from the set shop in a lot of different weights. Here are 3 different sizes of armature wire. And here is an even thinner piece of armature wire. If your subject only weighs less than an ounce and is only a few grams in weight, 1/4 of an ounce, 1/3 of an ounce, you don't really need something this thick to make your fixture. Let's say we wanted to make a CD float above a tabletop surface. We don't need this thick kind of armature wire. We don't need this medium weight armature wire. We don't need this thinner armature wire. In fact, this piece of armature wire, which is certainly thin and lightweight and could be bent with really easily, might be just the perfect thing that we need. Here's a piece of armature wire that I cut, and I formed it into what might look to you like a weird shaped spring. And here's a CD disc. Now, I have two little pieces of gaffer tape here, and I'm going to tape this piece of armature wire to the bottom of my disc. There's armature wire on the back of this. If we place it on the table, you don't see it. You don't see the armature wire that's supporting it. But you've created a really nice drop shadow along the front edge, and it's done in the camera. And it took me all of 30 seconds to bend and tape the armature wire to the back of the CD. Sometimes sand and armature wire aren't enough to hold the products or the subjects that you want to photograph in the place that you want them to be. Once if the frame is tight, once you pass the edge of the frame, your fixture can be anything. I had to photograph 5 different types of pliers to be included in my upcoming still life book, published in January of 2013. But to photograph the 5 pliers, I decided to use a hunk of 2x4 for my fixture. I drilled 5 different holes into a piece of 2x4. This was still around the studio, so it was easy to grab and show you. And I filled each hole, with a blob of fun tack. And then, one by one, I started to put my pliers into each hole where they were going to stand. And just as I did that photograph, I'm repeating how that photograph was done right now before your very eyes. An extra little blob of fun tack. Now, lighting the photograph is not easy, and that's the next step that you have to come up with figuring out how to do. But basically, there's my fixture. There are all my pliers standing up and smiling for the camera. And the bottom of my frame was here, and nobody was the wiser that they were all just standing in holes drilled in a piece of 2x4. Let's say that I have to shoot a bunch of items all to exactly the same scale. I don't use a zoom lens, I use a fixed focal length lens, and I build a little V in the back of behind the items on my set out of 2 pieces of wood. Once I've done that, and once I've locked down where my camera has to be, I can go through items and place them against the V, that's the 2 pieces of wood, one after another, at an amazingly fast rate of speed. In fact, I once did an assignment where it took us longer to unpack, check off on the list, and repack the widget than it took us to photograph the widget. Now, the idea is that you put a piece of you use a screw and a small piece of wood, a small block of wood to get this thing going. And first you put in the first block of wood that you're going to use. And once then that one's in, you use an angle iron, like we talked about before, to form a perfect angle. And then you screw in the next block of wood that you're going to use. And what you end up with when you're all done, which will take a second more, it would take even less time if I was using an electric screwdriver, is a way to place the item so that it always was in exactly the same spot. It doesn't matter whether it's short or tall or wide, they all fit exactly into the same little V in the two pieces of wood. And they're always the same distance from the camera, so they're always in focus. Just for a point of order, I once had to do a couple of hundred teapots. And they were all different sizes, but they wanted them all shot to the same scale. So in other words, they wanted a bigger picture of a large teapot and a smaller image of a little teapot. And I built a little V like this, and I would back the teapot into the V, and then so that I could put the spout of the teapot the same in every picture, I took a pencil and right outside of the camera's range, the pencil had a piece of tape on it, right outside of the frames, the edge of my frame, I taped the pencil to the tabletop. And as all I had to do was put the teapot in the V, line the spout up with the pencil, and I could take my picture. The whole idea is that to make your business profitable, sometimes when you have to do repetitive things, if you build yourself a fixture, you can do those repetitive things much more quickly and efficiently. And that means more money in your pocket and getting the job done quicker.